Mary Gordon is an internationally renowned educator, author, parenting expert, and especially a child advocate, and she's created award-winning programs focused on the power of empathy. In 1996, leaving the classroom behind, she founded Roots of Empathy, which now offers programs in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and is slowly but surely spreading around the rest of the world, as Mary is asked to lend her significant perspectives of the importance of empathy to government leaders, educational organizations, and public institutions worldwide. We have the honor of having a chat with Mary, as she has deemed this particular podcast an important link to her chain in spreading even further the net of encouraging educators to begin with the children's emotional reality and only then consider lesson planning of content. You're going to hear how Mary began the Roots of Empathy, a program that seems so simple now, but was absolutely revolutionary in its budding stages, as no one then considered the power and long-term effects of the lack of empathy in children, especially in disadvantaged areas. And the program all begins with mothers bringing in their newborns to classrooms, sharing time with children in preschool, kindergarten, and primary classes for the whole school year. In this way, the children see firsthand the ups and downs, the needs and the joys of a baby's first year. And the attachment they form from these visits, well, you'll hear how it changes their lives. There is no way to underestimate Mary's accomplishments, and it will become quickly obvious to you that I barely need to intervene, as Mary has a story oozing from every pore of her body and wants to tell it. I invite you to listen to this gorgeous story of the Roots of Empathy and decide what you can take from it that would reach the hearts of your own students so that they become more open and so more apt learners and citizens of the world. You do like the color yellow.
Is for me, colors do influence how we feel.
Absolutely.
So the base of our program is the color green and a green blanket. The baby has a huge green blanket, a circular green blanket. The children gather around and sit down. And so green is very much. And then the Seeds of Empathy program has a lavender blanket. And the children sit around that. And so the green blanket has become iconic.
Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit because I really want to start, not necessarily in the beginning because we don't need to go linearly, but I'm most attracted to the program because it's focused on empathy. And I think especially since the pandemic, although I was giving workshops on the affective domain long before the pandemic.
Good for you. Okay.
I mean, you have to look in the eyes of your students, and if they're not happy, they're not learning. So we need to find out why they're not learning, and there are 1.5 million reasons. If you have 50 children, there are 50 reasons why they're not learning. And so we go to the affective domain, and your program is based on empathy, which I love. I mean, straight to the core, empathy. So can you tell us a little bit about what your educational background is and how you began this initiative?
Well, yes, I can bore you with my educational background. It's my experiential background that you need to hear about.
Okay, perfect.
I had a typical arts psychology background and as a teacher, also education background, training, university.
Okay.
But it was my experience that in the kindergarten that I taught, I was aware of the inequality with which the 4 and 5-year-old children presented themselves. And some were ready to learn, and others were very timid and afraid of their shadow or super aggressive. So I was quite taken aback by that. If you're only 4 or 5 at the max, how could your life be, the trajectory be so set? So anyhow, as a result of seeing that inequality, I started Canada's first parenting and family literacy centers based on the power of love in the family. That if we wanted to change the trajectory for these children who were in disadvantaged communities, we needed to support the families. So this was not a fixer-up program. This was not, we'll make those parents just like middle-class parents, or this is the way to parent. There's no one right way to parent, just like there's no one right way to love. But there are some things that one can count on, and that's sort of the development of children. By and large, it's sequential, and some parents are not yet ready to accept that they need to get out of an abusive relationship. It doesn't mean they won't, but they're not yet ready. So in these centers, which were put in the most impoverished schools with the lowest academic reports, in the highest violence neighborhoods with the highest teenage pregnancy rate. So we were looking at pregnancy rates in little girls in grade 7 and 8. So one of these programs was exclusively for teenage mothers, very young teenage mothers. And unlike other situations, these mothers came because of trust, that they trusted. I didn't have a plan to fix them up. My plan was to open my arms, to welcome them as they were, and to allow them to decide what they wanted to learn. But basically, what they learned was how to make a friend, and they made friends with one another. And this was the pivotal thing, to help isolated single parents or parents overwhelmed with life, a lot of parents living on domestic violence, to help them find their way, not to teach them how to find their way.
You help them build community.
That's how it started. So my learning from these parenting centers was profound. And that's why I'm saying to you, university has nothing to do with it. You know, I might have a fancy education. It didn't help me at all. It didn't get in my way. Probably wasted some years of my life, but it didn't help me, if you know what I mean. It gave me credibility is all.
There you go. A lot of credentials. Really, it's just credibility. I have a doctorate. I did it because I love learning. So I understand. How were you funded?
I went to the Board of Education and I said, you have a very big problem. You need to start working upstream. Nothing has changed in the trajectory of these children forever. I can change it. And they said, how can you change it? I said, birth should not be destiny. Shame on you. And I was making it up, right? I didn't really have any idea.
So, Mary, you were going under the premise that these children probably weren't having much verbal interaction at home, probably no reading going on at home because the parents were on survival mode. And so what you were trying to do is, first of all, you found incredibly creative ways to find these women in a non-intimidating way. You made sure of doing that. But then you were going again under the premise of understanding that a home environment was more antagonistic, we could say. It wasn't a place where children could relax and learn anything. Is that?
I learned about the families of the children I was teaching. It was very humbling, and that was my first real education experience. You ask about education, what is education? It's, in this case, it was filling up the mind and the heart, right, at the same time with humility. So I learned a lot about how the children's lives were going and the complexity. And I had come from a very busy home, multi-generational home with lots going on, but grandparents all over the place, right? So it was really hectic. You could get lost in the crowd, but you could always find a lap. There was always a safe harbor, no matter what was going on. You could always get a story, a book, always a lot of love is what I'm saying. A lot of confusion, but a lot of love. But there was confusion in these homes, but so much anxiety. I didn't grow up with anxiety and I didn't grow up with violence. So I had to learn all about that. So that is why from these parents' homes and their devotion to their children, and in many cases, they just didn't know what to or couldn't do because they were so overwhelmed with their circumstances. And, you know, here I was a very young person, and sometimes a mother telling me, I have to leave this man. He's hurting me. I don't know where to go. And there's no education that gave me any indication that when you become a teacher, you're going to be dealing with things like that. So I left the classroom, you said, how did you get funded? I went to the Toronto Board of Education and said, you selected me as one of your top kindergarten teachers, and I'm telling you, kindergarten is too late. If we want to have an impact on these children, you got to do something differently. You're getting them downstream already at 4 and 5. You got to go upstream, and upstream means going home. The home is where it starts. So they said, okay, we'll try a pilot with you. So what I said was, okay, you give me, I don't know, 7 or 8 of the worst performing schools, and I'll meet with the principals. So I had lunch with the principals and I told them what I wanted to do. And I said, we can only have 5. I can only manage 1 a day a week. We'll get staff if this works, but I'm just making this up. So they all wanted it, but I chose the ones who I thought were most respectful of families. So I chose 5, and I did all the outreach in the summer and in September. We had all of those places humming by the end of September, and I was able to identify staff in each of those 5 centers who spoke the language that was predominant. This is Toronto. There was one program that was exclusively Portuguese grandmothers. There was another program that was mainly Chinese grandmothers, some grandfathers, and some mothers. There was one that was exclusively in a tenement, exclusively teenage mothers. And the other 2 were mixes. But the common denominator was poverty, but it played out very differently. So that's where I really learned the essence of roots of empathy and seeds of empathy. Seeds of empathy is for 3 to 5-year-olds in childcare, and they have a lavender blanket. It's the same philosophy, except there's other things involved with it, and the children are little. So the idea was that I created a roots of empathy around the idea that all the violence I saw, the common denominator was the absence of empathy. The perpetrators had no empathy. And I thought, okay, so how do you get empathy? And I always believed, without scientific backing, that we were all innately predisposed to be empathic, and it was what happened to us that nurtured it or, killed it. And what I came to see working with a lot of mothers and babies was that it was in that attachment relationship, that empathy in the first year, that empathy either blossomed or faded. And if the baby was treated harshly, if the baby wasn't responded to in a way that met the baby's needs, so the baby would feel understood, and that the baby would proceed according to how that attachment relationship proceeded. And there's lots of research on attachment relationship, but none of it connects to empathy. And in those old days, we're going back to 1996 is when I started Roots of Empathy. So based on those 2 things and based on an event, I visited one of the teenage moms at her illegal boarding house because she hadn't come to the program for 2 weeks. And if someone's in an abusive relationship and they don't show up, you worry. So I went to knocked on her door, and she came to the door, and I was worried because she had a newborn. And she had 2 little babies, this newborn little girl and a toddler. And the toddler was holding onto her leg shyly, and she was cradling the little newborn baby, and she had a big gash. And the first thing she said to me was, "Mayor, he didn't mean it. He promised me he'll never do it again. And he even cried." Well, let's give him a medal, said, I would have torn him apart if he had been there. This is empathic Mary speaking, right? So anyway, Roots of Empathy was created in a rage as I drove home through tears, raging after these little baby girls will grow up expecting that's what love is. Because she was telling me how much he loved her and how much she loved him. So that's when I created Roots of Empathy in that drive home. But based on my understanding that if violence is, underscored by absence of empathy. I'd been working with her for 2 years, this mom, and she still didn't get it. Her mother was abusive to her. I don't know further back, but in every case, all of these teenage mothers had been sexually abused in childhood, and all of them said, "Oh no, it was only Uncle Frank and only on Thanksgiving, and only when he's drunk," or "That was my brother's best friend, and he apologized." So that's what I was dealing with. So I wanted to break that cycle, that intergenerational cycle of violence and less than perfect parenting. So I decided the only way you can break that cycle is to go where all the children are. And where are they? They're in school. So I had an in because I understood how schools work. I took the 2 worst schools in the entire system to pilot Roots of Empathy. And I piloted with kindergarten class. And I insisted to the principal, I said, "I'm making this up as I go, and I want you in the room in case anything untoward goes on. I want you there." The first class, sexual abuse was disclosed by a little 5-year-old girl. First class, the principal was there. There was a student teacher as well as a kindergarten teacher, and the student teacher nearly fainted. She was so upset and shocked by what the little girl said. And anyhow, that child never went home again. That child, we had sick kids hospital, we had social workers, we had the police. They went to the mother's home. The mother was charged because she didn't protect the child. It was the older brother who was the abuser. And she said, I don't want her back. I want my son. Why? He was 14 and he was her drug runner. So, I mean, this is the kind of horrific things that go on, and I wanted to stop it. So then I realized I had to do a lot of roots of empathy. And it wasn't just uncovering child abuse. It was allowing children to understand their feelings and to be able to tell people how they feel, and to build an environment in the classroom that any emotion is okay, and that you have the safety of being able to share. No one is going to judge you. So I trained all the instructors that teach Roots of Empathy who are not the classroom teacher. I trained all of them in empathic listening, that you don't have any preconceived attitudes, you just erase, and you don't judge anything anyone tells you. And if you do this, children will smell it.
Could you give me an example of an empathetic conversation? Because it sounds what you're doing is probably paraphrasing what they say, repeating what they're saying, confirming what they're saying to you, but drawing them out and also giving them the vocabulary to speak about whatever is happening at home. Is that right?
Well, they get the vocabulary to speak about what's happening at home by a guided observation of the baby. How do you think the baby is?
Can you give us an example of what you would do or what one of these assistants would do?
Yeah, well, one of the instructors, who's not the classroom teacher, has gone through a rigorous 4 days of training and spends a year of mentoring certification. The heart of the visit is the family visit, where the parent and baby come. And it starts off with the children standing around the green blanket and singing the baby in. It's like the anthem. And the parent holds the baby starting at 2 to 4 months of age. And they present the baby to each child. They're all singing, and they keep re-singing the song, Hello, baby Jacob, how are you? How are you today? Till every child has a chance to hold baby Jacob's feet. It's a very personal, year-long connection, watching that baby grow and develop from a tiny t-shirt, size 0 to 3, they have 3 different sizes of t-shirts, just to give you an idea of what they see. They see that baby not able to lift its head, potentially, not able to roll over, not able to sit up, not able to reach, all of those things. They see these milestones. They rarely see the baby walk because the program's over in June and they start. So sometimes the baby walks, but each child is presented to the baby and they have a visit. So they see the baby all the way around the circle. And it is then guided observations. How do you think baby Amelia is feeling today? So they're reading the baby's emotional cues. And then you say, and why would you think she's feeling that way? What made you think that? So then they describe what they saw. And nobody says, oh, good answer, Amelia. Oh, good observation, Amelia. You don't judge if her observation was good or bad. You say, oh, I missed that. Or, oh, what else did you see? So you're basically acknowledging and thanking, but not rewarding or judging.
You're affirming. You're affirming whatever they're saying.
You're affirming, but you're also not judging who gets to speak. Because the little girls who get their thinking and their speaking in gear faster than little boys would predominate in this kind of a discussion. So we do a lot of waiting and observing and waiting for children to want to say something, to want to share. So there's lots of silences, much like our Indigenous peoples. Don't rush in and fill the silence. Leave space. Allow people the chance to consider. And they don't have to say anything if they don't want to, but there is only authentic dialogue, only exclusively authentic dialogue. You don't ask. The whole program is empathic questions, but none of those questions do we know the answer because it's the child's thing. So when you say, what's an example? Well, if the baby comes in and is whimpering, you know that this is not a happy camper. You might not know why, but you would be hoping that the children would notice the baby's upset and what might have upset the baby. And let's think about that. Let's problem solve. Let's ask the mom. You ask the mom, what questions do you have for the mom to help explain this? But we don't do any of that. We just say. how do you think the baby's feeling? And very often children will project how they're feeling. And when we've finished and we've gone around all of this, and we start always with 3 deep breaths, the idea is that you're kind of coming together. We've solidarity when you sing the song together and you welcome everyone. You're building solidarity. And then when you do the 3 breaths, you're sort of settling every child in. And now we're going to talk. And now we're going to observe. And it's quite remarkable without any instruction. It's all construction. Some child will say how they think the baby is feeling, and some child will have a better vocabulary of words for the emotions. If you don't get the words that you're looking for, the instructor might say, it reminds me of the word so-and-so, rather than the word for that is. So the instructor doesn't really give information the odd time of prompt, because the children need to be emotionally literate. And the first thing is to be able to have the words to describe the feeling. And then, of course, we have a class before the baby comes and a class after the baby comes. It goes all year, and there's 9 themes, and there's 3 visits for each theme. It's a long, high-dose program. So the projections the week before, and there's different levels of curriculum. There's a kindergarten curriculum, because kindergarten is unique. It's a specific curriculum for kindergarten. Everything is geared, the activities of the before and the post class, all about kindergarten. And then there's a primary and a junior and a senior. But we don't go to high schools because of the scheduling in high schools doesn't really allow for this. But it's one of our key things is intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is powerful because almost everything about school is competition based. And intrinsic motivation allows children to be exactly who they are instead of competing to be like someone else or better than someone else. And it allows for every child to take a chance because you're not going to be compared. So the children for whom it's embarrassing to have to speak in class, they may be new to the language, they may have a speech impediment, they may just not have enough experience being in a conversation. Many of the children who are on the spectrum choose not to speak in school, but I can tell you the children who have some level of autism for the first times in their lives get invited to birthday parties and Roots of Empathy classes, because everybody realizes we all have the same feelings. Even the little baby who gets nervous when the bell goes, we all get nervous. So the key thing is everything that happens on that green blanket with the baby is pitched back to the children's experience. When was a time that you felt like that? And then when we have the post class after the family visit in the next week, children reflect on what they saw and what they felt. And of course, there's a lot of activities in there to bring all of this out. So, the research on Roots of Empathy shows that yes, children become much more emotionally literate. Their affective and cognitive empathy increases. And when that happens, the aggression and bullying and violence goes down and stays down.
All right, so that is exactly what I was going to ask you about, the bullying, the connection between the empathy and bullying. It seems like it's obvious, but I'd love you to explain it more concretely, if you don't mind.
Sure. Most children or adults who bully are not fully cognizant of the impact it has on the victim. And they're usually doing it to show off with their peers, or to get a laugh if they're adults at someone else's expense, or to flaunt their power because they feel insecure in some way. So when children develop empathy, they have the capacity to understand that what hurts me would likely hurt you. And if someone did to me what I'm doing to you, I would probably cry inside, as one child said to me. And this ability to understand that we are all human, and our definition of being human is that we feel, and that there is, our emotions are universal. So that we might name them differently in Spain than we do in Canada. But the feelings are universal and they cross the age ranges. So that with the bullying, we often have children tell visitors who come to the classroom, the scientists, we get a lot of scientists, we get a lot of visitors coming to the Roots of Empathy classrooms, and they always want to know your question. So tell us about bullying. And we had one very funny class where nobody knew what the children were going to say. And this one little fellow, a blonde, cherubic little boy, he said, I used to be a bully. And Sir Al Ainsley Green was the visitor's name. And Sir Al said to him, so why were you a bully? I don't know. And are you a bully? So, oh, no, I don't do bullying anymore. And who did you bully? And he starts pointing out children. And then one little girl said, and me, you missed me, you used to bully me. And the Sir Al said to him, so tell me, why did you stop being a bully? And he said, I got roots of empathy. That was his answer. I got roots of empathy, meaning he developed empathy and he could understand. But nobody had to ask him to explain. So it's recognizing our shared humanity is what it is. And the children find in the vulnerability of this little infant, they find their shared humanity with the infant. We tell them, you were all babies. We were all babies. And we're all just bigger babies now. And we like to be held when we cry. And yes, we get lonely and disappointed and scared, just like the baby. So how can we help one another? So they become very skilled at reading the emotional cues of one another. And of course, they end up connecting to one another. They end up making friends with one another. The tone of the classroom shifts. The ability to learn is opened. And right now in this world we're in post-pandemic, schools are asking to have roots of empathy because they're finding the children basically unteachable. It's kind of, we know the mental health problem that children's dysregulation is through the roof. Poor teachers, same thing. Teachers are exhausted. They have families of their own. They're worried about their own children. So teachers need a lot of love, I'd say, in this moment in time. But the idea that it's so difficult to regulate the children, that they've forgotten their social skills. They have forgotten their academic skills. The teachers are under enormous pressure to fill in that learning gap. But they can't, no matter how much drill they're doing, they can't seem to bring the children back. So we explain it's because there's been collective trauma and they're dysregulated. And until you can bring down this sort of anxiety and help them self-regulate, you're not going to be able to teach them because you can't reach them. So what Roots of Empathy does is reach the children so that the teachers can teach the children. So they ask us, can you be our bridge? So when we go to the school in the fall and the children learn the names of their feelings and have a chance to talk about their feelings, and the teachers are guests in this, they participate, but they don't run the program. The teachers' minds are blown because the children trust saying things like, my dad used to cry every day. I helped my dad. He used to cry every day. So the children are, they're living with depression and anxiety and addictions and poverty and all of these things. And then they present themselves to school and the poor teachers have to get them back to here without realizing what has happened to you.
Teachers are not trained in this sort of thing at all. There's an assumption that teachers know what to do, and they do if they're that sort of person and have developed those skills, but otherwise they don't. And there's one thing that I would just contest, and that only is that teachers shouldn't be teaching. Teachers should be creating a learning environment so that students learn. If you're trying to teach anyone, it's forcing knowledge, it's throwing knowledge at them. And what you're suggesting and what you've created is a program in which the students' minds can open and learn. But teachers also need to participate in that switch of perspective. So how much training do the teachers get in the Roots of Empathy?
The teachers really don't have training. The teacher in Roots of Empathy is the baby. The baby wears a shirt that says teacher on the front and on the back, and we call them our tiny teachers. And I can tell you, Indigenous societies, from the Maori peoples in New Zealand to the Inuit in Labrador and Newfoundland, all understand this deeply. Our instructors are instructors, not teachers, they're coaches. And education to me is not necessarily just teaching. It's about reaching, meeting the child where they are, the whole child, emotionally, and what the child's wishes are. And to me, the whole education is about nurturing the natural curiosity every child has, and sometimes it's bludgeoned out of them at school. They're put in a box and there's a mark given. So in Roots of Empathy, we believe that every child is the captain of their learning, and that they all will learn, and babies are 100% problem solvers. And that's at its peak at age 3, and then it goes down. So we're making sure in Roots of Empathy that every child has critical thinking, all the executive function skills, that they have confidence in knowing that what they think and what they say is to be respected.
And Mary, there was a particular statement you made in front of the United Nations in 2010, right? Would you mind just recounting what you said there, because it's so powerful?
As important as it is for schools to help children learn how to read, if they fail to help children learn how to relate, we can expect failed societies. So people inherently understand we need to know ourselves to know one another. And that's what Roots of Empathy does. It allows children to like themselves, to make friends, to be able to solve conflicts and all of that. We only get by from donations, right? All of our donors, not all of our donors, I mean, many of our donors were children in the Roots of Empathy program, grew up and had a baby and thought, oh my goodness, I remember about the clenched fists. And I remember a crying baby is not a bad baby, but a baby with a problem. And I remember never shake a baby. And I remember that all feelings are fine. So we're very blessed, I would say, with generations of people who have understood and participated in Roots of Empathy and are making the world a better place.
And so, Mary, where do you want to go in the future? What is your vision?
Well, our vision is to change the world child by child, but also the mission statement is to build a more caring, peaceful, and civil society by raising levels of empathy in children, and that's our programs, and adults. And a lot of what I've done in my sunset years is the and adults bit, which is not about a green blanket in Roots of Empathy or a lavender blanket in Seeds of Empathy. It's about how can we impact people who are impacting other people. I believe teacher education needs to include empathy, that teachers need to value themselves, be aware of their power. If they have empathy, they can really help the children that they're teaching so much more. If they allow themselves to bring their whole selves to the classroom, and that we need to cultivate empathy in the children that we have in the classroom. It will break cycles of everything. You cannot address the climate challenges unless you have empathy, because you don't care. You know, the ethic of care, which is part of affective empathy, which we have all kinds of proof that we increase in children. If you want informed, compassionate citizenry, you have to raise levels of empathy in children, and they will change the world.
What you're doing is what my vision as well is, that we need to raise a generation that is more empathetic and can maneuver around this world in a different way than technology. And it sounds exactly what you've already done. So Mary, I just want to thank you so much for all of this information. What a beautiful, gorgeously expressed initiative. And thank you so much. I really am honored that you've taken the time to explain it.
You are part of my adults. You know how you said, what are you doing for the movement? Your podcast allows someone to consider the concept of empathy in their life. It doesn't have to be Roots of Empathy, but just the idea. So I feel you are helping me with my mission. That's why I said yes.
I love that. I have a heart expansion. So I love that. Thank you very much. That makes me feel
all the best. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mary. You too. Bye.
So that was our conversation with Mary Gordon, creator, leader, director of Roots of Empathy, along with a slew of other projects. The biggest takeaways are probably the importance of giving our students the opportunity to form an attachment that opens their hearts to empathy. In Mary's case, this is done with live babies whose mothers understand the importance of participating in the program. In your classes, if this isn't possible, and you'll never know until you try, you can use animals, dolls, or other creative ways to foster emotional attachment and so see a rise in compassion and empathy in your students. What other takeaways did you have from the episode? Leave me a note as to what you think you could use in the future in your learning environment. You'll find other engaging conversations like this at Doorways to Learning with Donna and activities to promote empathy in lessons at scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classes and at home, and see you next week for more.